Good morning. I want to thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to come in from San Francisco. I haven't been in St. Louis for a while, so I've enjoyed, actually, my host, Bob Klostermeyer, a colleague of mine. I'm staying with him. He's spun me all around St. Louis at this point to see some of the neighborhoods, including Ferguson, as a matter of fact. We went for a drive in Ferguson yesterday. I want to thank especially the accountants for being here this morning. They're all starting to get that look in their eyes. And we won't see them for the next 30 days, so this is the last chance you have. This is the way it's going to set up today. As Jacob mentioned, we're going to have kind of an interactive session. I'm going to make some opening remarks because I want to set the stage for you about business planning versus pitching and what we've found with our clients and really what we need to do in order to get them out of what we call the echo chamber of their own thinking. So we've done this with several of our clients. What we do is value acceleration for middle market businesses all over the United States, and in fact outside of the United States. It's a very structured program. We call it value acceleration because we have managed through the structure to condense the amount of time that it takes to actually accelerate dramatically the value of a business. And we focus on businesses that we think can move beyond incremental value creation. In other words, taking 5 years to add $1 million or $2 million worth of value to those businesses who can knock it out of the park. And this might be a business that's worth $10 million today, and within 3 years will be worth $50 million or more. Now that takes a lot of intense work and commitment on the part of the owner and their management team. And so we have a lot of activities and challenges that we put them through, including from the very beginning, a planning exercise that really, in the past, we've struggled with right alongside our clients until recently. So let me make some opening remarks. Then I'm going to ask you, if you haven't already, to spend a little bit of time reading the case study, maybe 4 or 5 minutes if you haven't. How many people have already had the opportunity to read it? Okay, so we'll take 5 minutes and let everybody get familiar with the first part. I've got the second part on the presentation, which really has to do with what the business is going to be doing going forward. This is a real business, a real case study, by the way. And then I'm going to turn it over to you. You're going to spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes at your table preparing to be the sharks. And then we're going to come back and have a conversation about what you see in the case study. If you were a shark, what would you be advising the client to do? And you can look at it from the viewpoint of a private equity. You can look at it from the advisory viewpoint or the banker viewpoint. I'm sure we have, according to the list that I saw, a very diverse group, so it'll be an interesting conversation. Then we'll open it up for conversation. We'll toss some of those issues out, have a good conversation with one another, and then I'll come back and I'll tell you what some of the sharks in this particular case advised our client to do and think about. Okay? I think this is probably 45 minutes to an hour. I'll try to keep it to that, but to a certain extent it'll depend on how much you guys have to say. Now, let me step away from the microphone for a minute and ask you, can you hear me? Okay, pretty good acoustics in here, as a matter of fact. So I like to move around a little bit when I speak. So the first part, when I'm making my remarks, I'm kind of tethered to this microphone. I'll stay here because I've got it written down, and I apologize for doing some reading, but I need notes here to get through this first part. And then we'll go to the presentation after we look at the first part of the case study. So I've advised hundreds of clients over the years, and to a one, they all seem to struggle with planning. I don't know if you've had this experience, but I would say the majority of our clients who have been in business 25 or 30 years have in fact never had a real plan. They've just kind of flown by the seat of their pants, and they've been very successful, as a matter of fact. But as they move into the next stage of the business, which might include something like an expansion or some other kind of challenge that they're trying to solve, they realize that not only do they need to step back and create a plan, but they, on the other side, don't really have any planning competencies within the organization. So it's definitely something that they need to overcome. The purpose of planning to them seems to be mysterious, and I think it might be mysterious to a lot of us. And therefore, the form of the plan, the business or the strategic plan, as it might be called, is pretty fuzzy. What is it exactly? And what's the difference between a good plan and a bad plan? They ask us that question all the time, and I'm not really sure that I have the answer. And is the distinction between the two really that great? Is it really that black or white? It's difficult to tell. And again, they're kind of inside the echo chamber, right? They're asking themselves these questions. They're not really going out into the market and testing their assumptions. And this is an immediate problem that we saw. So there are thousands of books, articles, theories, methods out there. You know, you can go to the bookstore, you can find 100 books on the shelf about business planning. We never seem to stop writing about it. And each one of these is an innovative game changer, right? The new way to do the plan. So our clients look at it and they're completely overwhelmed. They try to find something out there that they can rely on. They don't know where to start. And most of them have tried. They've experimented, they've adopted, they're trying to cut through the noise and find something that works. But they're still really understandably skeptical of planning because the results speak for themselves. I think most business plans come right out of the gate fatigued. And what does that mean? They have zero energy behind them. I don't know if you've found this when a client has tried to write a plan, it just runs into a wall right away. Nobody reads them, nobody uses them. They're probably complete, they've followed all the rules, they've met all the requirements of a plan. It starts with an executive summary, it goes through, operations and sales and marketing. They've got all the sections there, but it doesn't have any velocity at all. It's pretty much dead on arrival. It seems to lack entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of the clients had it on day one in their business, right? They were excited about what they're doing. 25 years later, that entrepreneurial spirit to a certain extent is kind of evaporated, and they're trying to recapture it, but a plan is really not the way to get excited again. And I think there's almost a sorrow to it, I've seen, that they can't go back in time and recapture what they had way back when they started the business. And I also think that results completely speak for themselves. We have to ask ourselves, if the outcomes of traditional planning are insufficient and ineffective, then we need to tear it back to the base. We have to ask, what's the cause and effect? What's behind the failure? It's not the form of the plan or even the process. It's more fundamental than that. And we found, as we thought about it, we came to the conclusion that we were ignoring 4 crucial issues. 1, science, and more particularly scientific method. Hypothesize, predict, experiment, analyze, validate, and then go back through it again. You guys we all learned this in high school, right? This was the scientific method. And in order for it to be scientifically valid, you have to be in a position to invalidate your prediction. Otherwise, it's just simply not scientifically valid. Which brings us to number 2, human nature. We are really not wired to invalidate our own position. I am an investment banker, I am an expert at this, we are wired to always be right, right? This is something that we struggle to overcome. Then, the third issue for us is that adults engage and learn with information in very specific ways. They don't do it like children do it, where they seek a lot of information out of curiosity and try to cobble that all together into a perception. Adults must have a well-defined problem to start the process. That's why they come to information. They seek it because they need to solve a problem. And then what they learn from solving the problem, in order for it to really stick and have an impact, has to have an immediate application. They don't want to wait between the time that they create the solution and the time that it gets applied. Otherwise, it loses a lot of steam. And this is a problem with business planning. They write the business plan, and then they're trying to figure out exactly why they did it. So the question is not what is it? The right question is, what is it actually for? And the third issue in adult learning is that they like to be self-directed. Adults like to be self-directed. You are an adult, you know this. And they like facilitation, but they don't like someone else to tell them exactly how to do it. So this is their exploration, okay? So traditional business planning doesn't define a problem, in my opinion. And any immediate application is pretty questionable. It lacks focus. So again, the right question isn't what is it, it's what is it for? Now, the fourth issue that we found, which goes to today's topic about using a mock Shark Tank, is that testing, if you're going to go back to the scientific method, testing requires a lab, right? And this is what we were missing. It's got to be a reasonably safe space where we can explore and discover and learn and apply without exposing ourselves to a lot of undue risk. And traditional business planning requires that we take that risk and move it out into the market in order to validate our predictions and find out whether we're right or wrong. And not only do we risk a lot in that process, we lose the competitive advantage in the marketplace of surprise. We show our hand. That's another problem. So we all know that our clients have to plan, and no one disputes that. It would be completely illogical to do so. And our clients accept that. They know that it's a major gap, and wishing it away will expose the company and its capital to profound risks. So how can we facilitate a process that overcomes all these barriers? How can we produce better results and outcomes that inject energy, create change, spur action, and instill confidence? And that last part, I want you to kind of retain that, because that was the big transformation that we saw when we began moving managers to leadership, is that they came out of this process with a completely different perspective and confidence. But we were still struggling with this. Even after we identified the crucial issues, the question became, all right, now what do you do? And then one night, I was watching television, the source of all good ideas, right? And there they were, Sharks and Entrepreneurs, a debate that was set in the crucible of the capital markets, which appealed to me. Not a plan created for its own sake, and it wasn't delivered in the dry language of strategies and tactics. This was a very alive situation. Everybody was really engaged, right? So we had the hypothesis from the entrepreneur. We had the prediction from the entrepreneur. They were saying this is what we think is going to happen in the future and why we need your money. We had the testing from the sharks back to the entrepreneur, and we had the collaborative validation, which ended in either an investment of some sort or a rejection of some sort. But it was a case, it was a business case, it was an argument, and it was aimed right at the money. There was a clear goal, a clear focus to that. And it was also energetic, and it was fun, and it was productive, and you could tell if you've watched this show that the sharks love it. They like the exchange, and the entrepreneurs do too, even if they don't get the money, right? Because they're all members of this entrepreneurial club now. They understand why they're doing business with each other and talking to one another. So we reasoned, what better lab is there than the capital markets for our clients? Because like it or not, if you want to grow a business, you're going to have to deal with the capital markets at one point or another. It's going to be equity, it's going to be debt. Somewhere along the way, you're going to need some capital from an outside party. So we felt that the lab we could create in the Shark Tank could be safe. We felt that it could be constructive. And that's when I picked up the phone and called the Sharks. And I put together a team of 4 people. I asked the current bankers for this particular client to get involved. There were 2 of them. And we were fortunate that they both had a very sophisticated, what I considered to be kind of non-commercial banking background, which was now they were working in commercial banking, but they both came from Wall Street and they both came from an investment banking background. So that was just kind of a lucky deal. What they didn't know, and what the opportunity that they hadn't had at that point, was they didn't know the story of their clients. And this is something that we often emphasize with ours, which is if you want to have a true banking relationship with your commercial banking, you have to do more than talk to them when you need to increase your line of credit. You actually have to talk to them about your story, where you've been and where you've headed. And they like it. They like to do banking in the way that banking was designed, which is we like to get behind our clients and help them grow and become a better company. Now, we all know that commercial banking to a certain extent has changed dramatically over the last 8 or 10 years. But I think what I'm finding when we bring bankers into the Shark Tank is they actually have told me they feel honored to be there and learn the story of the client because it's such a rare experience for them. So great, we love that. We had 1 M&A advisor on the Shark Tank, and the 4th person was a partner in a private equity firm. Now, I called in some favors to do this, right? Folks had to fly and spend time and really kind of commit to engaging. But they did it, and they did it gladly. We had a set of rules for both the sharks and the company, and here they were. You needed to define a specific problem to solve, and you need to focus on that particular opportunity. So we were not trying to present a business plan. We were trying to present a problem and a solution. Then you had to define a strategic solution, and your goal was to present a persuasive case, right? Make a business case. And then instead of creating a business plan, we taught them how to create a pitch book. If you're an investment banker, I'm sure everybody's seen a pitch book. It's a completely different format, right? So we didn't care about executive summaries and whether you had a section on sales and marketing. We kept getting those questions from the clients. Show us a pitch book, we'll just follow the model. I kept saying, I'm not going to show you anything. You're going to have to figure out how to build your argument. This may not be natural to you, but believe me, if you think about it, there's a way to do it. You'll figure out what format actually fits the function. The management team created the pitch book, right? So what I ask, which was the hardest part of the whole deal, is that the founder and the owner of the company had to step back completely. No contact with the management team. The first time the owner in this particular case saw the pitch book was when it was pitched, and he was a wreck. Right? You can imagine, 23 years. He had really been involved in daily operations the whole time. But I told him, the management team needs to do this. Not only do they need to do it for themselves, they need to do it for you, because you need to understand that your role in the company going forward, if it is in fact going to engage in this accelerated value creation, has to be completely different. We gave them velocity as a rule, 60 days, beginning to end. You've got to define the problem, create the strategic solution, create the pitch book, and here's when the sharks are coming to town. So we're not moving the date. If you're not ready, then that's a problem, right? So they had to do it fast. You have 45 minutes to pitch, and then there was about 2 hours of discussion. And during that discussion, we let everybody speak on the Shark Tank, but we also had a lot of exchange from the management team making the pitch. So they would make comments from the sharks, the management team could go back and challenge assumptions, ask questions, then we would come back with additional clarification. So there was a lot of exchange over that 2-hour period. And then immediately debrief with the management team and the owner the next day. We got no gap between the two. In the Shark Tank, have lunch. It was already scheduled. The next morning, we got together with them and we spent most of the day debriefing on the implications of the Shark Tank, and then go back and rework the pitch book, right, from your point of view. So now what I want to do, is that clear? Basically what the format of the Shark Tank was, all right? So we get them out of the echo chamber, right? We ask them to test their assumptions in the actual market in a lab, which was set up to be constructive. I counseled all of the sharks that, hey, this is not supposed to be mean-spirited, right? We don't want that part of the television show where, you know, the whole deal is kind of torn apart. That's not it. This is not chum in the water where the sharks feed. We want it to be constructive. We want to leave them with something to build on. It worked beautifully. So let me give you 5 minutes to review the case study that you've got in your packet if you haven't had the opportunity. Shouldn't take more than that. Just read through it real quickly. Maybe make a few notes. Then I'm going to present the go forward piece, and then we're going to go into our workshop. Any questions so far? Okay. Here's part 2. So the client's plan moving forward. Just to reiterate some of the things that are in the case study, you can see these percentages are not here in this particular graphic, but, oops, sorry. The dark green is where the concentrations of employment are for construction managers as of May, by state, as of May 2003. So you can see that you have heavy concentration up and down the Northeast Corridor, Texas, California, as you would expect, Arizona, this area is pretty heavy, and then down here in Florida. The growth in construction employment has followed that trend, and the really hot markets are here in Florida, right, 11%, over here in Nevada and Utah, and then down here in Texas, you've got North Dakota up here, which is all oil related for the most part. We'll see where that goes. And then pretty steady, kind of holding steady up and down the northeast coast. You've got total concentration in New York, Florida, Texas, and California, where a third of the people in the United States live, right? Just in those 4 states. So you can, construction follows population, follows employment, so on and so forth. So it's a trend that you have to be, the demographics really drive a lot of this stuff. So here's the plan. Here they are down in Central America, Costa Rica and Panama. Panama is a really hot market right now for construction. So they're doing a lot down there. They created 2 teams, 2 SWAT teams, right, which were embedded in the first markets that they are expanding into in 2015. These SWAT teams were essentially responsible for gathering intelligence, building the initial bridge relationships that they were going to need in order to create a plan for expanding into these markets so that they could get a survey of what's actually going on. You can't do it from a distance. So construction is still very much a local business for the most part, even though investment in real estate is global. So expansion team 1 came from Costa Rica and went over here to Miami, right? SWAT team 2 came from Panama and went up here into the Houston area. Now the idea is that after they get these markets established, and Miami will probably spill over into the central and northern markets in Florida, mostly Tampa and Orlando, then they'll start spreading up the East Coast, and probably the first 2 markets, primarily because of their client base. You saw in the client list there are a lot of pharmaceuticals there. So the Research Triangle is very fertile for them here in North Carolina. That's where a lot of these folks, they also have these pharmaceuticals, have a lot of business down here in Central and South America. So North Carolina and also up into the tri-state area. They've already got some teams that are starting to embed up here. And then they can take Houston to Dallas. And over here in Nevada, there is a big, you guys are aware of the Tesla 5 gigawatt battery plant going in. There also, right here, there's a big business park about 15 minutes east of Reno that has 57 corporate commitments already to build plants and headquarters operations. It's one of the biggest development areas of the United States right there. There is 0 infrastructure for the most part 15 minutes east of Reno. So they don't have much water, they don't have many roads, they don't have schools, they don't have hospitals, they don't have housing. Right? So now all these people are flooding the market. The Tesla plant is, they think, anywhere between 12 and 25,000 people. That's the effect on the local market. The biggest 2 towns are Silver Springs, which is what I would refer to, not totally disparagingly, as a sort of trailer park community. It's very small. And then you've got another town, which is just north of I-80, which is more of a bedroom community, but not much there. So there's a huge amount of activity that's going to come online over the next probably decade in Nevada, right? So that's the reason for that big jump. Now, their process was embed the SWAT team, gather intel, build relationships, develop a set of scenarios that might play out and a playbook related to each scenario. They needed cultural and technical cross-training, right? So there's not just the cultural piece, but there's a lot of technical stuff that needs to happen. There's also the licensing issue in some areas, right? They're professional engineers, so they need to be able to move back and forth across those borders. Back home and in the local market, they need integrated managerial controls and systems integration. That's a big piece of the deal, because honestly, all of the overhead, the fixed costs, and the management infrastructure is going to remain down here. At least that's the plan, right? So they can get some scale. And then identifying the critical path to the first customer. This is the primary problem that they have to solve. And any other lack of focus on the critical path to the first customer, right, all that other noise and planning is meaningless. Because what you have to do when you're expanding into a market is get customer number 1. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. And then launch the operation. Now the question that always comes up, and what's interesting to me in the Shark Tank process, is not only were the sharks asking about, could you buy companies in the local market, not just cut alliances? Are there targets that you might be able to identify that either the bank could get behind and provide debt financing for acquisitions, or you might be able to raise some equity? Or are you going to try to do this organically, or a combination of both? Now, most of our clients in the middle market have really not much understanding of how you do an acquisition. Most of them have never done an acquisition. So it creates a lot of questions for them, but they get excited about that possibility. So we talk about it a lot. Now, the market criteria for this particular company were that they weren't going into markets that didn't have a robust private-public partnership, P3 orientation. And they also have a product line you may have noticed called owner's representative, which is growing for them, and that's where they stand in between the investor or the developer and the general contractor, and they provide a lot of insight into whether the project is actually getting built on time, on budget, is there safety concerns, so on and so forth. There must be a reasonable probability of at least $1 million in revenue in year one at 5% net margin. No more than $400,000 in launch costs in any given market. Robust professional labor pool. Where they are in Central America, this is a big problem. They don't really have people, and there's a lot of brain drain coming from south into the United States for a variety of reasons. Wages are higher, quality of life is higher, schools are better, so they're having trouble keeping people there, but they need to make sure that they've got access to labor in order to grow, especially in this business. Cross-cultural advantages, they speak Spanish, right? So if they go into Florida, South Florida in particular, they go into Texas, they have that connection as well, which is powerful. Strategic alliances, they need strategic alliances not just with local firms, but much bigger engineering firms who already have relationships in the marketplace so that they can slipstream, right? They can sort of skateboard on the back of the bumper of those bigger companies. And then preference to markets with client crossover. That's the thing that I was talking about, pharmaceuticals in their area, pharmaceuticals in North Carolina. And then a target minimum by the end of year 3 of $2.25 million in revenue, operating at a 10% net margin. Now that's primarily, they can get there and possibly more by keeping those fixed costs down in Central America where costs are lower, right? So they can work from a remote location. They don't have to rebuild the infrastructure to a certain extent. Here are the financial projections. The blue line is what their primary markets are projected to do. So you can see they're not uncommitted to the primary market, but they don't anticipate that it's going to grow. This little dip right here is the last 2 years, but this is about 2% growth over the next 5. And then you've got, this is sort of launch point, and then you've got a waterfall, right? You got market 1, 1 million, 1.5 million, 2.25 million, then market 2, same thing. So you kind of see a walking waterfall, and this is the effect of the expansion into the new markets if the financial metrics hold. This is on the revenue side. Then you've got net operating income. This is blended. So you saw probably in the package that they had a very good year in 2013, right? And then a dip. This was unusual for them. And then the effect of the expansion on a blended net operating income before tax would be up to this point. So they're doing a lot of work to get back above where they were in 2013, but it was kind of an outlier year anyway. And then the blended margin here, it's dipped a lot, 2013 to 14, and now they see some growth. And all of this is attributable, for the most part, to the United States, right? Make sense? Okay. Here is the mix of the contributed NOI. So this is obviously pre-expansion. The red is expansion NOI. So by this time, they're almost exactly 50-50. And that's their goal, to more or less double their net operating income through this expansion while holding it fairly steady in their primary markets. Okay? Now, having heard that, and that was essentially their pitch, the whole pitch was related to, here's who we've been in the past, and we're going to continue doing that. And we've got a lot of knowledge that's been built up over 23 years that we can use in the United States. On one page in that first part of the presentation, you saw sort of the colored boxes, integrated project delivery, right? And then these breakdown. That's totally proprietary for a company of their type. So this is something that has been developed over the last 23 or 24 years that sets them apart. It also gives them the foundation for really expanding these unique advantages into another market where they're going to be seen as unique. There's no question. Will they be accepted is another question, perception versus reality, right? So now I'm going to ask you to spend 10 to 15 minutes at your table discussing about everything that you now know in the company from the viewpoint of a shark, right? Whatever you guys want to talk about. So have at it. I do agree the presentation, and I think you'll see that the sharks agree with you, the presentation misses the metrics of business development. What's the market size, how many projects are actually there, how many clients can you work with, what's the process of selling, how long is it going to take, right? How many meetings, right? It's sort of like, what's the ramp, right? What's really the ramp to get in there? And are you selling the right things, or are you just following your clients along?
You got an exit plan?
Yes, 5 years. He shared it with everybody in the company. He wants to do mostly an internal management buyout, and the management is on board with that, but he won't do it if they're not prepared. So he cares about the legacy of the company. He cares that the management team is the right management team to run it, and there may need to be some changes there in order to get there. He will not leave. He's got that door open, but basically he said, look, you know my number. If we can't get there and I can get a better number from somebody else, I will go that direction, right? But 5 years is the horizon, and there were two other things that went along with it. He's willing to take $1 million risk out of his personal capital on this expansion, but it's going to need to be leveraged, most likely, as you probably sense. It's an ambitious expansion. And he will not be the bank for the company. So in 2 years, all personal guarantees, all collateral property. He's got a lot of real estate on the line, right? So that's it. His personal financial risk, other than the $1 million that he'll put behind the expansion, which is capitalization of the new U.S. entities, that's it. Everything else has to stand on its own. Very important to seek higher margin business, right? It's got a cash flow. How can you leverage existing clients, right? How are you going to get in immediate cash flow, right? What's that launch strategy playbook look like? We'll back it with $400,000 in capital if it turns out to be a longer ramp than we think. But a lot of that capital is going into the SWAT team, by the way, because when they take the SWAT team out of production in Central America, right, they move them into the market, that's lost utilization because they're not billing anything in the United States. So you might spend, you're spending money on these folks. So there has to be some capital behind it. The question was, is it sufficient? Nobody at the point, and I didn't make them, I kind of let them find their way through this because I wanted them to see, again, adults learn when they engage, right? So basically I sat back and I said, you're responsible for coming up with the argument. Yes, there are going to be gaps. We're going to learn from this process. Nobody had really done cash flow analysis, ROI, things like that, right? Is $400,000 enough? Does it actually convert? When does it convert? At what margin? Is he going to get his money back? So on and so forth, right? Interesting that the CFO never brought it up. Technically, this company executes as well as any company in this space that I've ever seen. I mean, they are on top of it. And any company, if you've seen private-public partnerships, they are a real specialty. And there are very few companies anywhere that have actually seen a P3 project from beginning to end, and this is one of them. So that's a potential competitive advantage because they can point to a resume that says, we've done, these huge complex projects that have all these different stakeholders, and we're kind of caught in the middle and we know how to manage the project, and we can show you that we've got the systems in order to do that. It's a real competitive advantage. Right? Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get any jobs in the United States, but it's something that it's a message that they can move into the market. But do they have the right team in place? Now they're on a hiring binge in the United States. They're bringing in people from the United States side to complement their SWAT team and make sure that they've got those folks in place. But I'm not convinced that they have the totally right team back in Central America. You guys familiar with the Miami market? It is a Cuban market, right? Very tightly controlled politically, financially, and otherwise. So everything runs through the Cuban channel if you want to get business there. Well, you'd think, and their assumption was, we're from Central America, we speak Spanish, right? We're all part of the same thing. Nope, not at all, not at all. So that slowed everything down, right? And they've had to kind of build the relationships over time. Believe it or not, they're getting it done, but it's just been slow. And almost all of the ones who have non-technical training, in other words, business degrees, of some sort were trained in the United States and have actually worked in the United States. So they do have some crossover there, right? By the way, they speak there is no problem, there's no bilingual challenge here, none at all, with the exception of the CFO. It's funny, I just keep coming back to that guy. That's kind of a problem spot for me. Good, anything else? Okay, they have two very powerful strategic alliances, huge engineering firms that are bringing them in to slipstream on existing projects, right? They have hired the guy in the United States for P3, so he's a rainmaker, who has worked in Washington, D.C. and is coming down to join them in Miami. I imagine his role will expand as time goes on. The owner is a real rainmaker. So these mixes, now they don't make as much money on the private side, but there's a lot more volume, believe it or not, and they get paid on a regular basis, monthly. So they might charge $25,000 to $50,000 per month for the owner's rep work, and it's just clockwork, right? And it's not that hard to do. The P3 stuff will suck up all the resources in the organization, and then you don't get paid for 6 months. It's really two different businesses in my view, and it's really two different pitches. Right? So who are you? These engineering companies have to be owned, they can only be owned by professional engineers, which is fascinating to me. So bringing capital into that company is a real challenge because they can't have any outside owners. In the United States, no problem. It's not like that. And there's also not much, I mean, they have to get licensed in the United States, but they're well qualified to do it. So that's less of a concern. All those other things that you said, right on the money, no question. Here's the problem with pharmaceuticals and the challenge. A lot of consolidation, they buy each other all the time. They go through these big sort of tectonic shifts, right? You don't really know who you're working for. And the people who buy construction management services are now the procurement people in the pharmaceutical, and they always go low bid. So they don't see value in the professional services like they used to. 10 years ago, you didn't get hired by the procurement people. They didn't have anything to do with it. You got hired by the capital project people within pharmaceuticals. So they're not quite sure what to make of the market. And they've been tagged before on this, that they'll be working on a project, somebody buys somebody else, shutters a plant, whole thing blows up. It's challenging, you know, it's not as easy as one might think. It's pretty robust, but a lot of it is being offshored. Right, and Central America, South America. I mean, they're big companies, there's no question. And they are starting to reinvest in capital, their capital in capital, you know, projects, which is good. The trend is, you know, moving. Almost 9 straight years of recession, still struggling. Panama's heating up, that's good for them, but they've had to go far and wide to survive, quite frankly. And when we talk about focus in these markets, it's really important, like who are you, what's your competitive advantage? What they will say is, look, we had to do all of this stuff in order to really survive and continue growing and have some stability in the company. And because we did that well, it allowed us to create some innovations in the marketplace on the owner's rep side and the P3 side. We never would have gotten there because we were able to gather all that knowledge, right? So we could make new things and we could make them really well. We know we have to focus, but look at what we did against some significant cross current, right? So it is a good piece of the story, and it was noticed. Yeah?
Do you get any information on why the margins compressed so much in 2014 or were expected to compress, 4%?
Yeah, there was a little story there. One of their biggest clients basically shafted them for about $700,000 on no notice, right? It was a government client. It came back. We're in trouble. We got to cut. So they cut 10% across the board with all their service providers and just didn't pay them. So it wasn't a great year to start with, and I think there was a rubber band effect to a certain extent on some other things, but yeah, it just, you know, it was a challenge. At one point they thought they were going to lose money, and they really, you know, struggled to get back to where they did. They did make a profit, obviously, but it was thin. Okay, real quickly, let me show you what some of the sharks said. So, the private equity came up with an interesting matrix here. These are the investment criteria, right? And he gave them positive and negatives. Industry opportunity, positive USA, the trends are right, negative in Central America. Management team, he saw them as positive, especially after meeting them. You don't have the advantage here of really seeing them in action, which I realize is kind of your one step removed. Competitive attributes, totally unaddressed in the presentation. And we talked to them a lot about this doesn't happen in a vacuum, guys. You're going to go into a market. You think they're just going to open the door and welcome you? What would you do if they were coming into your market? They're going to do the same thing. So you got to be aware of that. That's where the scenarios and playbooks come into, and alliances, quite frankly. Stability of numbers, up and down, right, in both the revenue and margin side. Profitability, a negative, low EBITDA, kind of declining a little bit. Growth opportunity, he wasn't sure. He wasn't convinced. We'll see what happens based on the plan, right? And customer concentration, he didn't like the fact that they were in the public sector, even though the margins were higher. He wanted to see a better mix. There's a lot of text up here, so I'll just kind of go through it. His mental box, what he called his mental box on first thoughts. People are the business, appears to be a great team, have a good feeling, good service equals good company, right? 3 ways to compete. I thought this was very interesting. Price, product, and service. Really, it appears that service is where you are. He liked that. But think about productizing the services, right? Really kind of put something in a package that people can understand. Here's the point about following your customers, right? Leveraging those customer relationships. Here's the competitive piece. How are you going to displace the incumbent? Really important question. Really, not as easy. And then, hey, you just need one new customer in Florida. What's the critical path to that customer? You didn't tell me how you're going to get that first customer. So when you're building the strategy, things to think about. How are you going to compete? Again, price, product, or service. Great focus on expanding to the bigger market, but don't forget to take care of your home territory. Sounds of it, there should be 2 plans. What's the U.S. startup? So he says, look, this is a startup. This isn't an expansion. This is a startup. You got to treat it that way. And Central America, which is mature. You're going to have to figure out how to operate in 2 very different places. Think about winning ties, right? How, if you're going to tie somebody in the marketplace, 1-1, how are you going to win, right? And then reverse engineering. Again, this is the competitive piece. How would you feel if a company from Miami came to Central America? You're going to face that same difficulty. How are you going to build the brand? You guys talked about that, who you're going to be. And then changing perception and reality. From his point of view, it was much easier to change the reality. So you need to change the perception that a U.S. project shouldn't go to a Central American firm, which is a barrier, right? Why are you coming into our home territory? And he thought that the local office was a good start. He liked the SWOT. So tactical, build the plan around local business. Mathematically, support the metrics. Build it up instead of just saying million, right? 1 million, 1.5. What actually we're dealing with. Matrices of key differences, that's a competitive differentiation. The rifle versus shotgun, more patience, more precision. Any back doors to enter, acquisitions, strategic alliances, and then consider the strategic hire in the U.S., which in Miami has been done. And then financial comments. Why is there no consistency in the relationship of revenue to margin? It's kind of difficult to tell where they are at any given time. Is the business being managed to the overhead or to the work and volume? I can tell you it's work and volume, not overhead necessarily. Revenues vary greatly, so how is that managed within the cost structure? Can you go from fixed to variable, creating more flexibility? What's the debt capacity of the company? Lenders don't like low margins, right? And the variation in revenue, so how are you going to convince debt to get behind you because you're going to need it? And then the margins by industry, customer, and service level would be a good study. They don't have enough intel there. And then do you lose money on paper but still absorb overhead? What's your break even on a project basis? They're pretty good at that, but they didn't really build a good case, I think, within. Okay? I want to thank you for your kind attention this morning.